Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 047, and this video is going to be a bit of a discussion, or rather sort of a lamenting, if you will, about past political mistakes I've made. And this is going to be kind of about being more honest and kind of cleaning out my closet a little bit. And it's also going to be sort of a run-in into my video about Christianity, which might not make sense now, but hopefully it'll make sense in the end. And of course, I'm talking about my previous left-wing politics, which I've sort of mentioned here and there in other videos, but I never discussed it in detail. And so I thought I would take the time out to discuss this and give my opinion on this now that I don't believe the way I used to believe anymore. Now, of course, I was left wing politically at one point, and I was actually so left wing, in fact, that it was part of my identity when I was in my teens. I was always really more of a progressive liberal, but I did call myself a socialist when I was in high school. Now, I didn't know what that meant, because when you're young, you're just not really that politically sophisticated. But I used that term to describe myself for a while. And then I became a libertarian, a sort of left to Ron Paul type libertarian for a while when I first entered college. Then after a while, I started delving a little bit more into Marxism. Was attracted to that. But I always was a vulgar Marxist. I was never really a serious Marxist. I believe Marx was an historical determinist. I followed only the classical Marxist texts, which I hadn't even read all of them. I still haven't actually. I've only read bits and pieces. I've read the bulk of it, so I have an understanding of the thought. But I'd never read really anything Engels wrote, but I did read a good amount of what Marx had written, and had a solid understanding of the thought. And I was of course attracted to it because I was attracted to the theoretical side of it and to the Marxian economics, which I still think has some relevance, even though I don't believe in the rest of that nonsense. But as far as the theory was concerned, I was attracted to the theory because I've always been an intellectually inclined person, and when you are an intellectually inclined person, you're naturally attracted to these sorts of things. I think there's a reason why intellectuals tend to be left wing. When you're intellectual, the theoretics and these sorts of things do attract you. They attract your mind because they make you think, and you're also attracted to the idea of free thought on some level. But all this, of course, becomes a sort of a group dynamic, and it also ends up becoming something which is disconnected from reality. I think it's actually what happens when you as an individual concentrate on too much on abstract thought. You lose your ground level understanding of human social dynamics. And I think left-wing politics is a perfect example of this. And I got to a point where I could not embrace that way of thinking anymore. It happened for a great deal of different personal reasons, but it just happened that I could not take these ideas seriously. And gradually I moved back to the center before eventually becoming more conservative. It just happened. And one of the things that really helped me really internalize this, because it had, like I said, it had been part of my identity when I was younger. So it was a part of who I was. Now, one of the things I should probably say about how I grew up was that both my parents were liberal. My mother was more conservative than my father, but my father is very liberal, even very left wing. So I grew up with these kind of ideas. Ironically, in a town that was more psychologically conservative and culturally conservative, even though it was a democratic town. That's how the town was. So being left wing or liberal put me above the herd, I thought. It wasn't only till later on, until I actually moved out of the town. I don't live there anymore, and started thinking more about things. I realized, in fact, that this was not really true. I realized that, yeah, in fact, the society does tend to be very liberal, and that we have, in fact, become more left-wing as time has gone on. I don't believe that the kind of idea that the left it doesn't get any credit. I mean, the far left doesn't. The far left doesn't get any support at all. But if you're just a regular liberal person, you're pretty much in the right setting. You're in the right culture. Political correctness, all these things dominate this way of thinking, or rather, the collective consciousness of the society, and it does so to a very large degree. And when you're of course thinking this way, I think it, like I said, very much disconnects you from the nature of reality, the nature of the way things are of people. And I think large amount of the problem that we have in the West is that we don't live in reality. We live in sort of a delusion, and it can't last forever. Now, as I was saying about my family, anyway, my family was very liberal. I grew up like this. I grew up this way of thinking, and what eventually got me out of thinking this way is that I realized that I would myself was psychologically conservative. That is, my brain was wired to be conservative. The fact that I was liberal didn't really make any sense. It just didn't make any sense given my psyche, and given, of course, the sorts of things and ideas I was attracted to when I was a kid. I was always a history buff, for instance. Loved history, loved the past. I'm actually more interested in the past than I am in the present or the future. I just love delving into history. I love history. And all the cultures that I used to admire when I was a kid, I used to read about, were traditional cultures. They were traditional old world style cultures from Europe. And I thinking about this made me realize that, yeah, I'm in fact attracted to these ideas. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that's being said by everybody who believes this way. One of the things I do criticize the right wing of being like, and one of the reasons why I never really bothered with the right wing initially, because I would read back into history and I get a different impression of history than your average right winger. Um, but for instance, the idea of homosexuality being wrong, being horribly wrong, for instance, when you go back, it was something that was entirely accepted and normal. It didn't mean that there wasn't people who didn't like it, or that there wasn't some levels of it, but most of it had to do with effeminacy in men primarily. It wasn't really an issue of having sex with someone of the same sex. It was primarily directed at effeminate men, and that was really where the origins of quote unquote homophobia comes from. But you're assume listening to some right winger that the past was totally purified, or you hear something like, this is against nature, when it's a fact of existence. It's not perverse or whatever. It's just a fact of existence. This is going back to pre-Christian times. These are the sorts of things that I would read, and I would be like, I don't really see what the hell the big deal is, as long as you keep it to yourself. It shouldn't be a problem. But you have some of these people want to slaughter people. I couldn't get with that. But I had to get over that. I had to realize that these are just people and their ideas. It doesn't affect me in any way. I could say I'm more to the right than to the left, and it doesn't mean I believe in all these other crazy ideas, but quite frankly, I'm what you might call a conservative libertarian to a large degree. Lowercase c, lowercase l. But I believe you should be allowed to essentially do what you want. If you want to drink, you want to smoke, you want to do drugs, you want to have sex with who you want, that's fine. Just take responsibility for your actions and don't tear the entire culture down with you. Those are the only two standards I have. Don't tear down the culture, and take responsibility for your own actions, for yourself. Do not, externalize this to the rest of the population. Take responsibility for your own actions and your own actions alone. And as long as you do that, it doesn't matter. You can do whatever the hell you want, as far as I'm concerned. And that's how I feel. Now, the other thing that made me really be able to accept the fact that I was conservative, because as I said, it was a big part of my identity, is that I found, as I started examining different things, that there's all sorts of what you might call lowercase little conservatisms. You find that human beings are conservative, that human beings are naturally conservative, and that you find more people who are really conservative than you are liberal. And in fact, when a dominant group embraces liberalism, it's a sign of decadence. It's a sign of decline. It's a sign maybe even that they've had it too good, and that they have maybe a little bit too much privilege, if you will. I don't want to use the term privilege, but they've had a good time, and their time is now going if they embrace these ideas, because they really are disconnected from the way people are. Of course, a lot of my views on human nature are from my own personal experiences with people, but I'll save that for a different video. Now, as far as how all of this leads into Christianity, is that left-wing ideas, liberal ideas, have their origins in Christianity. As far as I can tell, I'm sure there's other precedents in other cultures, But as far as I can tell, the highly developed form of left-wing ideas that we have in this culture, liberal ideas that we have in this culture, the Western culture, have their origins in Christianity. These are just secularized ideas from the basic assumptions made by Christianity. And the idea of a utopia, it comes from the idea of heaven, creating a world in which there's no toil and no suffering and these sorts of things. This is not even Christian itself, but these are ideas that are not true. They don't exist, and they cannot be achieved because they're just impossible. They make way too many promises. And it's a nice idea. It's something to strive for somewhere, or maybe, but it's not achievable, and I don't think it even really should be achievable. But as I explained that in my other video, but these humanist ideas, these secular humanist ideas, are secularizations of essentially Christian, Protestant, maybe specifically, but Christian in general, and this idea that you have to care about people, you have to love people, that everybody is equal. This reflects every soul is equal before God. Every human being is going to have to answer to God someday, regardless of what they are. The idea of free will, these are Christian ideas. These are Christian ideas that are very valuable to people. People really believe in this idea of free will. These are Christian ideas. Kind of think of what else. What else would be a good example of Christian ideas? Well, the first person who wrote the book Utopia, Thomas More, was, I believe, a saint of the Catholic Church, and that was what led to all these different things regarding this idea of utopianism. And this, of course, led to utopian socialism. Utopian socialism eventually led to what is it? Scientific socialism, Marx, Engels. And this led to the modern left. And the modern left, in many instances, is angry because the Christian church was not Judeo-Christian enough. Most of their arguments, they argue about slavery, for instance. I mean, slavery, for instance. I'm not going to get into the subject of slavery, but let's be honest for a second. Slavery is a human universal. It has existed in virtually every culture, even primitive and prehistoric cultures have had slavery. And yet you hear people become angry about the idea of slavery. It's because Christianity declared that slavery is wrong. There's even a book, and you could try to find it. I haven't read it, but it's actually entitled "How Christianity Created the Modern World." Christian ideas are what forged the civilization in which we live in, and these are the ideas that are in fact what has created a tapestry, if you will, to go back to the red pill and the blue pill. These ideas create a tapestry around the human individual of untruth that leads to a perception of the world that is not, in fact, true. And it's part of breaking out of this idea that eventually things are not true. These things are not true. These are not actually how human beings behave on any level. And so my own conclusions eventually were that there needs to be a sense of realism when you approach political ideas. And of course, this is based on the idea, and it has nothing to do with how I feel about it. I'm not saying, of course, these things, because this is ultimately the issue, because we all believe things are subjective. I'm talking about what is reality. When you look at history and when you look at life itself, there's no guarantee that things can ever be changed to make anything better. So I had to embrace for myself a more realistic view of life, and it does not come from either Christianity or the left. It's ironic because I grew up Christian. Both my parents were Christian, and I do believe that the psychology of both liberalism and Christianity, both Christian and liberal, Christianity and liberalism are in some level connected, and neither one of them really stands up to a serious scrutiny of human nature and human beings. Of course, traditional Christians have their pessimism, but their pessimism is then sort of externalized to a utopia somewhere else, in heaven somewhere. But anyway, that's all I really wanted to say about this subject, and that's all I have to say, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.